What is wrong? Oh, lens cap. Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. Today I want to talk about work holding. How do you secure a workpiece in place so that you can work on it? Now first I have to talk about a little bit of philosophy, and I know that turns some people off, but this is going to be kind of interesting. One of the things that is very different about power tools and hand tools is how you address the work. Not as much about do you take the tool to the work or do you take the work to the tool, which is very important in the two, whereas if you're using a table saw, a planer, a jointer, you're usually taking your wood and you're running it through the tool. Whereas with hand tools, you're usually running the tool through the work. And so that really requires the ability to lock the workpiece in place so that you can work on it. With most conventional workbenches, that can be a problem because there isn't always a good way to hold things down, such as, a vise, whereas you really don't want to be holding things with that, and that's why this is really dusty. I don't use it very often. Now, on a traditional bench, you might have many different ways of holding your work. One particular, a leg vise. A face vise is another great way. A Moxon style or 2-screw vise. A Holdfast to hold onto your bench top. A wagon vise or tail vise. So with all of these clamping options, how do you choose how do you want to hold work down to your bench? Now, there are many different types of work holding clamps, vices, and other holding apparatus, and I don't really want to go into all of those because usually they're kind of a spin-off of either a leg vise, a Moxon vise, a Holdfast, or a face vise or tail vise. And once you have the idea of different ways of holding it, you can kind of figure out what will work for you. So first off, I want to look at actually what is it that you want to do with your work. What are several different methods you want to use to hold it? And then I want to go through these vices and actually talk about them and what they can do and how they can be used to hold in different orientations. So when working with a piece of wood, you have three sides basically that you're going to be working on. You have the edge, you have the face, and you have the end. And you really need to be able to hold work in place so that you can work on all three of those surfaces. So you might be able to get away with one vise that will do everything. But as with anything, if you have one thing that will do it all, it will not be good at everything. It will just kind of do most things. And there may be one or two things that it's really good at. So first, I want to look at the leg vise. Now, a leg vise is a really nice vise for many different things. And if the board isn't too long, you can work the edge. If the board is too long, you need something to support this end out farther. And there are many different ways of doing that with a dead man or a second vise or Holdfast in the bench edge. But if it's not too long, and most things are not, this actually works very well for doing your edge work and can be very useful for that. If you want to do face work, that can be a little bit more tricky because you have to kind of balance it out and you have to have it sticking up higher, so you have to be kind of pinching the bottom side. But with a little bit of effort, you can still make face work with a leg vise. One place where a leg vise shines is with end work. And the nice thing about that is I can clamp this board up against that leg all the way down. And so I have really, really strong registration all the way down this leg, so I can work on the end. And that is extremely useful. The problem is I have this screw in the middle, so I have to kind of be working off to one side or the other. And so the leg vise has a tendency to twist. So you can get away with just using this, but you're going to have limitations in how long of something can you use and how it can work for you. So let's look at the Moxon vise. So with a Moxon vise or a 2-screw vise, now this isn't like a strict Moxon vise, which would actually be a standalone unit that you clamp to the top of your workbench. This is fairly useful in most ways. You can work the edges extremely well with this because you have a very, very solid connection all the way along this face. So I can run a plane down here without any problem, and this is extremely solid. Because it's a longer connection, you can put a longer board in here, and you don't always have to worry about something supporting one end or the other. For face work, this becomes a little more difficult because it has to have a large enough mouth to open this up. And this particular one does not have a large enough mouth to open this up. The place where a Moxon style vise really shines is when you want to do end work on a board. So because there's a screw out here and a screw out here, I have all this space in between the screws that I can slide a board down in and clamp it up. And this is great for doing dovetails, for doing your chisel work for around a tenon. So many applications where having this open space in the middle is extremely useful for working on the joinery of a board. So this is a great vise for doing end work, but it's not as good for face work. It does have some benefits for doing edge work. Now let's move on to a face vise, and this is called a face vise because it's on the face of the bench. It is a large flat surface to a large flat surface. Usually there are 2 parallel bars for slides and a third for a screw, though there are some variations with that. This is fantastic for edge work, but as with others, you have to find ways of supporting it. Most people will put the face vise along the long edge of their bench so that they can support it farther down the bench. I have it on the end of my bench, and so I don't have as much possibility for supporting things. So if I go much longer than 3 feet, this really isn't very useful for that. I can do some face work with it like this, just like I would with a leg vise, and this has many correlations to a leg vise. Also with the end work, I can clamp it on the end here, but I'm kind of sticking over the edge and it's not as strong and sturdy because there's nothing clamping to this edge. Yes, it works, but it's a little more difficult. So in many ways, this has a lot of drawbacks that the leg vise or the Moxon vise can easily overcome. The one nice thing about my setup is it also doubles as a tail vise. So with a tail vise, you basically have a dog that sticks up back here, and then you have a whole row of dog holes where you can put in a stop, slide it into place, and clamp it down. And in this case, I have a completely unimpeded surface, so I can plane all the way along this beautifully and really have a nice clean surface. This board is not going to move. I can go across the grain and I'm not impeded with anything in my way, and because it's clamped from either end, it's extremely solid, and this is a great way to work faces. You can also, to a point, work edges in here the exact same way. The problem is that if the board gets too high, then they have a tendency to tip one way or the other. So you can do some things with it. The nice thing about this is that when you're pushing down here in the middle, it's supported on the bench the whole way along. Whereas if you're doing it in another vise, either end might dip off, or if you have something connecting to the other end, it might bow in the middle. So for jointing surfaces, this is fantastic because I can register off the flat surface of my bench. This, though, is really not useful for doing edges because, well, there's absolutely no way of clamping an edge in this. So it's drawback there. Great for surfaces, fairly good for edges, pretty much worthless for ends. So last, I have Holdfast, and I've done a whole video on Holdfast, so I'm not going to go into detail on them. If you want to see that, you can click on the link over here, and that will take you to far more information on a Holdfast. But in many ways, they have very similar properties. This is one of the oldest ways of holding work, and you can hold it up on edge, and you can work on the edge of a board. You can flip it around, and you can work on the face of a board, or you can have it hang off the end of the bench. And now I can work on the end of the board. And so with this one simple device, I can do all of that work. The one drawback is if I'm working on its face, I'm going to have this vise, I'm going to have this head in the way, so I'm not going to be able to go all the way across the board. That can be easily remedied by having a second board to hold either end that the Holdfast holds, and that can actually be very beneficial. And I go into that in the other video very much in detail. Then on top of all of that, there is a whole other world that says, you know, you really don't need anything to hold the vise. You just need a stop in your bench. So you slide the board up against that, and you can plane away. And you know, there's something very freeing about that, because if I want to check anything, I can just pull it up and I can check it and I can put it back down and I can go to work again. And there's something very nice about this because it does take a little bit more skill to hold things in place as you work with them. But in many cases, it takes a little more work because you have to actually, physically figure out how you're running the plane to keep it in line with the stop. And you can make a wider stop so that the board doesn't want to twist as much. You can make a taller stop so you can do it on edge. And in many ways, you don't generally need to have a vise if you have a stop. But for my money, a Holdfast is probably the cheapest way to hold work to a bench. I mean, the price of most vices, you're running $60, $70, $80, $100, $200, $300 for the good ones. Whereas with a Holdfast, you know, the really expensive ones aren't going to get you anywhere near the price of a solid vise. Whereas if you just want to try with stops, all you need is a dog, and you can make one of those out of a piece of wood. So holding work is kind of something that is the basic of all hand tool woodworking. Really, until you have a method of holding your work, the hand tools you collect are going to be kind of pointless because you need to have some way of securing this so that you're not just pushing against air. And that's one of the reasons why a bench is such a great tool, and in many ways it's the first tool that any hand tool woodworker should have. On where to actually get started in work holding, a Holdfast is a fantastic way to do it, and I really suggest going and checking out the video on Holdfasts. They go into great detail about all the things you can possibly do with them. And honestly, if you have a pair of Holdfasts, you can hold work down and work it in any orientation you want and not have to mess with vices. There are people who don't want to do actual work holding and they want to have stops, and there are many benefits to that. And so it's really kind of one of those things you have to play with yourself and find out, you know, what works for the way I want to do things. So if you want to actually see the hardware that I'm using for Holdfasts and vise, I'll leave a link to that in the description below so you can actually go check out the site. These ones are from Black Bear Forge, and they are absolutely gorgeous. So I love playing with Holdfasts. They're one of my fun things, so if you haven't seen that already. So that's about it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sure I raised far more questions than answers because this is a topic that I could just go into for hours and do entire videos dedicated to one aspect of one of these vices. If you did like this video, please hit like and think about subscribing. I do want to say a huge thank you to the patrons on Patreon. You guys are really the major reason why this channel is still up and going, so thank you for that. If you did like this video, feel free to check out one of my others. You might find something you like there. And until next time, have a wonderful day.